Hello everybody, it's Kate here and welcome back to Mosse on a Monday. You know the drill. Each month on a Monday at 4 o'clock GMT, I choose 2 fiction and 2 non-fiction novels that I've loved, biographies that I've loved. Some are new, some are old and come from my shelves here. But the only point about it is to celebrate amazing books for all you fellow book readers and book lovers out there. So I'm going to dive straight in this week with the book that was judged by the Crime Writers Association to be the greatest crime novel of all time. And it is this, The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey. This is my old copy. You'll see the new edition up on your screens a bit later on. Now, I don't know how many of you know that that is Richard III. And one of the things that everybody knows about Richard III is he smothered or had smothered, killed the 2 little princes in the Tower, right? Well, actually, it turns out that he was fitted up. And it's the most brilliant modern day detective story. It was published in 1951. Josephine Tey wrote under several names. Josephine Tey was actually her great-grandmother's surname. She was really called Elizabeth Mackintosh. And she wrote 5 crime novels that had Alan Grant from Scotland Yard as her detective. The first was The Man in the Queue. And this is another of them, the third one, The Daughter of Time. And Grant is laid up having followed... I can't remember if he's a burglar or... Anyway, he's a very naughty criminal, and he's fallen down a hole, he's broken his back, so he's lying flat on his back. And it means that he can't do any detecting. And out of that, one of his friends, an actress called Marta, who also appears in several of the novels, comes with some photographs and images and pictures and says, look at all of these. And the idea is that Grant, as a detective, will look at the faces and be able to tell the sort of people they are. And he sees this face and says, oh, you know, it looks like a man who's haunted, who's grieving, who's got the, you know, the troubles of the world on his shoulder. And then they go, but it's actually Richard III. And so it's a detective story about a classic crime, if you like, a cold case. But it's also a wonderful book about what historical fiction is and how history is made. I'm just going to read this little bit. They've gone quite a long way through about whether Richard III really did do it. Was he responsible? And he's talking to the lovely American who's helping him in this, a young man called Caradine. And Grant says, the point is not that it's a parallel. The point is that every single man who was there, and he means there at the time when the princess disappeared, or the person who was eventually, 20 years later, hung for the crime, supposedly on Richard's orders. Every single man who was there knows that the story is nonsense, and yet it has never been contradicted. It will never be overtaken now. It is a completely untrue story, grown to legend, while the men who knew it to be untrue looked on and said nothing. Yes, that's very interesting, very. History as it is made. Yes, history. So I'm not going to say who Grant, and actually real historical research subsequently thinks really did do it, who is responsible for the death of the princes in the Tower, but it's everything that you want from a detective story and everything you want from historical fiction. The new edition is out, published by Arrow, and it was the last book that she wrote. She died in 1952. And a tiny, did you know, just to finish with, she was really passionate to write plays. She wrote lots of things based on historical characters. And her really famous play was called Richard of Bordeaux, and it went on in the West End in 1932, and it ran for several years. And she wrote under the name of Gordon Deviot. But the person who was her director and her leading man had great reason to be grateful for having been cast from obscurity into this play. Who was it? John Gielgud. The Daughter of Time, Josephine Tey. Now, my first non-fiction this month is a very different kettle of fish. It actually only came out in January, maybe, 2022. And it's this book. And it's called If Not For You. Beautiful book. Look how gorgeous that is. And it's by a new writer called Georgina Lucas. And I'm going to tell you the blurb, I think, really, because it's the best way to start it off. In November 2019, Georgie and Mike had their second child. He was born 9 weeks early, and his name was Grey Atticus Fox Grumbridge. And this book is the story of the 21 days that they had their son with them in the world. Now, the minute you say that, you think this is going to be a very, very sad book, and of course it is. But actually, it's a book about love. It's a book about what it means to have the story that you thought was going to happen completely taken away from you. It's a story about two people with their young toddler on holiday, just taking a break before the next baby arrives, and something happening and them being rushed to hospital and everything that follows from that, and discovering little by little that actually Gray had been ill all along, and it was extraordinary he had lived that long, let alone being born and surviving for 21 days in the world. But what I loved about this book was that it is the story of hope in adversity. It's the story of how extraordinary people can be, and how generous and loving and wonderful, and all of the people that they meet in the hospital, in the ICU unit for the children, the NICU unit, the ways in which their family and their friends, and indeed their other toddler son, cope with the situation, and how they come to an acceptance of what has happened, what they need to do, and how they learn to mourn their little baby boy, but also look forward to the future and how things will be in the future. One of the things that really made this book stand out for me, and why I chose it, is that Georgina Lucas, who is, she's been a journalist in many different fields, but this is her first book, so it's extraordinary to be writing about something so very, very deeply personal in her first book. But she is an absolutely beautiful writer. I'm just going to read, just a couple of words. There's so many things. You could, all the pages are turned down. But said, if I were to look closely at the jagged edges of my fragmented heart, I'm sure I'd see that some space now shines with gold. And it's about, as I said, it's about what real grief and tragedy can also teach you. Not that there's any element of these things are good for the lessons that they come, but the way in which somebody negotiates, how they all negotiate the way through this. The other thing that I love about the book, and why I really think anybody will enjoy reading it. It sounds daft to say you'd enjoy reading it, but it is such a beautiful, hopeful book that sings with joy and love, as I've said, is that she's very, very funny. And a lot of the things that happen, of course, are really comic, that black humour that happens in the darkest of places, the relationships that are made, the extraordinary midwives, the nurses that look after them. So it's a beautiful book. It really deserves to be out there. So do check it out, pass it on. I don't know if some of you might have heard Georgina Lucas being interviewed on Woman's Hour, and everybody there was clearly completely enamoured of the book and in love with her. So it's a book, Georgina Lucas, If Not For You, which I think is from a George Harrison song, actually. There's a George Harrison song called that. And it's come out in 2022 from Little Brown Books, and it's beautiful. Right, my second novel for Mosse on a Monday, February version, is from the wonderful Queen, really, who is Elizabeth Day. Now, this is a book proof, so you actually can't see the title on here, but the jacket will come up on the channel in a moment. And the novel is called Magpie. And Elizabeth Day is one of those people, she's a beautiful novelist. One of her novels, The Party, was one of the novels I read and was completely blown away by. And Magpie I read in one sitting, just sort of sat down, read it from start to finish, faster and faster and faster. She's become incredibly well known now for her podcast called How to Fail, and of course is now a presenter of book shows on television. She's also been a Women's Prize judge, of course. But this it's a thriller. It's what is normally termed in the book trade as domestic noir. But it also has a great deal of interesting contemporary themes that really grip you. So I can't tell you much about it, because obviously almost everything is a spoiler. But I can tell you as much as the publishers tell you, which is that Jake and Marissa, a seemingly really happy couple. They go round and they're looking for a new house, and there's a moment at which a bird, a magpie, obviously flies in, and Marissa sees this, and it seems, is this a bad omen? Maybe they shouldn't move to this house. But everything seems fine until because they're struggling, and young parents, and they're going to have a baby, they have a lodger, and the lodger is called Kate. And at this moment, everything in the novel starts to shift, and you're not quite sure. It's like rug is pulled out from under you. And Kate seems good to start with, but then she's kind of moving her toothbrush in to sit in there alongside theirs in their family bathroom, and she's really over obsessed with Jake and Marissa and the relationship and the child, you know, that they want to have. And it's not about, you can't always tell who people are. It's a novel about infertility and motherhood and modern parenting. It's a novel about the hidden side of mental illness and the pressures that people are under to be glittering and perfect and have this perfect world and everything is documented. But more than anything, for me, as someone, as you now know, reads a great deal of crime, it has one of the best reverse twists that I've read in anything probably since Sarah Waters' Fingersmith, where there's a moment when you go, what? And it completely all flips on its head. And Elizabeth Day pulls that off. I didn't see it coming at all. And then everything after that, you start to revisit all the things that you thought about all of the characters and who you thought they were, and your sympathies go 180 degrees compared to what you thought. And there's a second pretty brilliant twist at the end as well. And I defy most of you to work this out. I pride myself on seeing those things coming. And in a lot of domestic noir, particularly when there are fragile women at the heart of it, I don't like a lot of this. There's a lot of fiction at the moment where women seem to be incapable of making good judgments about people, and everybody's fragile. But you know what? Women are tough, and we know what we're doing, mostly. But everything in this book is just so, so clever. And at the heart of it, that vulnerability, never mind, we're going to leave that in. The vulnerability that almost everybody feels when suddenly they're responsible for a new life or a baby is on the way, and how that is one of the most undermining things as well. So I cannot recommend this highly enough. It was a bestseller when it came out. It came out last year. It's published by HarperCollins, but it is the very wonderful Magpie by Elizabeth Day, published by Fourth Estate. So my final Mosse on a Monday pick for February is from the wonderful Adam Kay. Now, all of you will know Adam Kay. His huge bestseller, This Is Going to Hurt, which is one of the funniest books that most of us have ever read, and his follow-up, 'Twas the Night Shift Before Christmas, are just his stories of being a junior doctor, but he's incredibly funny. I once did a gig with him, and I could barely go on and do my bit afterwards, because he was playing his piano and he was performing, and he was singing lots of really classic songs like Hallelujah, but with medical things. So Hallelujah became, well, I won't say what it became, but it was extremely rude and incredibly funny. Anyway, on top of being now a global bestseller, he still is passionate about the NHS, which trained him, and is a very active, outspoken supporter of everybody who works in the NHS. So this, he decided during COVID to get a load of us together. I was one of the 100 people to write this book. We all did it, to support the NHS and two charities, NHS Charities and the Lullabies Trust. This book called Dear NHS, 100 Stories to Say Thank You. And there are lots of celebs in here, as you would imagine, really famous actors and performers and musicians and all of these kind of people. There's also a smattering of writers as well. But it's just incredibly moving. And I wanted to talk to everybody about this book today because we're still there. Because the NHS, all of these people in the NHS are still doing all of this for us. Now, for those of you who are not in the UK, you might be switching off here now, but you won't want to because the writers are incredible. So there's a mixture of stories. My story, I wrote about my 91-year-old mother-in-law, for whom I'm a carer, taking her electric piano out into the street in COVID when people were very isolated, and playing for carers. So after the clap for carers on a Thursday evening was over, Granny Rosie got out her piano and played We'll Meet Again and Bye Bye Blackbird and all of the old time songs. And so that all of our neighbours, many of whom were quite elderly, could sing along in the street, and just for that moment had that connection that everybody so needed, particularly in the very deep lockdowns. Other people, Dawn French talks about her mum's death in Derriford Hospital outside Liverpool and what that meant to her. Matt Haig talks about the various times that he has needed the NHS and his family, and when his daughter, I think, was born very, very prematurely. Catherine Meyer, who is an extraordinary campaigner, founder of the Women's Equality Party, writes about the death of her husband, Andy Gill, from the Gang of Four. He was one of the first people to die of COVID in the UK. But there's also lots of hilarious stories, as you would imagine, in here. So the book starts with Louis Theroux. And Louis Theroux has just discovered that he's put out an injudicious tweet, shall we say, about Scientology. And the lawyers of the Scientology movement are coming down on him like a tongue of Brits. And his lawyer is essentially saying, well, you know, if you will put out tweets like that, what do you expect? And he's not being very encouraging. And in the middle of this, he discovers that, I'm not sure what you're allowed to say on YouTube in terms of bodily parts, but shall we say some gentleman parts that I do not currently possess, have swollen in a way that is very, very unfortunate. And he takes us through, firstly, having all the diagnosis and going in, but what it's like to be somebody whose face is quite well known in that situation. So he has a very young, very attractive female doctor examining him, and then when it's all over going, really like your shows. Miranda Hart has a very similar story about what it's like to be if people recognise you. And she actually asks herself, is she getting different treatment because she's well known? People have seen her on the telly. And then her piece is very beautiful because it says, no, she can see that absolutely everybody is getting this incredible treatment. And I loved that story. There's 100 stories, and some are brilliant and some are searingly painful and honest. Others are very true. People have not said these things before, but it just shows what British people feel about the NHS and why we all are fighting to protect it, because every single person in this book has a thank you they want to say, and we were all so thrilled to be able to say it. And Josh Widdercombe, I'm just going to read his one out loud. I'm sure he won't mind me doing it. It just says, last year when I was in hospital, the anaesthetist told me that he thought that they should legalise heroin. I'd never been under anaesthetic before, and I wondered if this was part of the process, like counting to 10 until you've passed out. Good news, we know he's under. He stopped talking about the point he agreed that fat on drugs could help the NHS. I don't have any strong views on the heroin question, not the kind of views I would share with strangers injecting me with morphine anyway, so I nodded and smiled and tried to move the conversation onto Arsene Wenger like I do in the back of a taxi. And then I passed out. Support the NHS. So that's it. Dear NHS, 100 stories to say thank you, edited by the very wonderful Adam Kay, who put it all together and got us all, it was like herding cats, getting everybody into a room. It's published by Trapeze. And as I said, all of the charities, the NHS Together charities and the Lullaby Trust get a percentage of the royalties for this. So that is just one reason, even if you don't read it, to buy the book. So that's it for this month, for February. I hope you'll enjoy the books. I love all of your comments and questions, so keep those coming. And I'm going to be, in the summer probably, doing a few interviews on this channel on YouTube. I'll be talking to some other YouTubers and booktubers, because I think there's lots that I'd like to learn from a different generation who are passionate about books and putting things out there. So when you email in or respond to any of these films, tell me who you'd like to see. Because, you know, with technology, you know, we can talk to anybody, anywhere. But for now, it's Kate signing off, and don't forget, whatever you do, just keep reading. Bye for now.